Today's question, why not mix linen and wool? Today's video is addressed to Jews and Christians, but if you're a part of the atheist faith or Muslim, Hindu, pagan, whatever, then go get your popcorn and enjoy the massive food fight that's about to break out in the comment section. All right. Bomb Shelter Bibles, coming to you live from the Bomb Shelter. Welcome to Bomb Shelter Bibles with explosive scriptures that will blow your mind. If you're new here, my name is Teddy Chadwick and I do Bible studies, news updates, and I love doing scripture explanations. So make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell notification so you don't miss any of these news flashes. Okay, rockets year to date in Israel between 135 to 150. Plus a number of balloon explosives during January and February. Now contrast that with over 1,500 rockets and missiles shot against Israel in 2019. And that was the biggest rocket fire since the end of Operation Protective Edge in 2014. So in 2019, there were over 1,500 rockets fired during 12 rounds, each of which lasted only several days, but the majority were fired during 3 of those rounds during 2019. All right, moving on to the Parashat haShavua. On the rabbinic calendar, the weekly reading is Tetzaveh, and that calendar has you in the month of Adar 1, where the Hebrew Bible calendar has us now in Adar 2, Adar Shtaim. So it's the 13th month. So that puts us at Parashat 24, Vayikra, which is, for the Torah reading, Leviticus 1 through 5:26 in the Hebrew, or 1 through chapter 6, verse 7 in the English. The Haftarah reading is Isaiah 43:21 through 44:23. And the Brit Chadashah reading is going to be Romans 8:1 through 13 in the Andrew Gabriel Roth setup of the weekly readings, or according to Dr. Jeffrey Enoch Feinberg, it'll be Hebrews 10, verses 1 through 18. So, back to the Torah reading. Vayikra in Hebrew is, and he called, in the Hebrew language. And that's the first words of Leviticus chapter 1, as the portion extends from Leviticus 1 through the beginning of chapter 6. Interestingly, in old days, Judaism referred to this book as the laws of the priesthood, which is similar to Leviticus, having Levi or Levite as the root of the name in Greek and English, coming from the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Torah, the instruction books of Moshe, or Moses. So, Vayikra lays out the Levitical laws of different types of sacrifices in this section, chapters 1 through 6. And one idea is that today we don't necessarily sacrifice animals, but the animal nature within us. That's what we sacrifice now. So this would agree with the concept of circumcision of the heart, cutting off parts of the flesh, sacrificing the animal nature within us. So then with the rabbinic Torah portion and Haftarah, this is Parsha number 20, Tetzaveh, which would be Exodus 27, verse 20, through Exodus 30, verse 10. And then also Ezekiel 43, verses 10 through 27. And with Andrew Gabriel Roth, the Brit Chadashah reading would be Philippians 4, 10 through 20. And with Dr. Jeffrey Enoch Feinberg, the reading would be Hebrews 13, verses 10 through 16. Now, in this portion, Exodus describes things in the temple, such as the priest's clothing, the special clothing worn by the high priest, Kohen HaGadol, the special fire on the altar, the Urim and the Tumim on the breastplate. Interesting that in rabbinic tradition, Talmud Yoma 21b, it is written that the breastplate with the Urim and the Tumim, the fire, the high priest's clothing, existed also in the second temple, not just the first temple, but they were not as helpful as it was in the first temple. Now, with the feast, we have something coming up. For both calendars, the rabbinic calendar and the Hebrew Bible calendar, Purim begins next week, and that's the book of Esther with the Feast of Purim, which means lots in Hebrew. So the two calendars are only offset from one another by one day due to a difference in the beginning of the months. So for a Hebrew calendar, the Hebrew Bible calendar, Purim begins outside of Israel at sunset, the 14th of Adar Stein, near the end of March 8th. But inside of Israel, it begins at sunset, the 15th of Adar Stein, near the end of March 9th. Now, on the rabbinic calendar, Purim outside of Israel is sunset, the 14th of Adar 1, near end of March 9. And for inside Israel, sunset, the 15th of Adar, near the end of March 10th. So that's the sunset near the end of March 10th. That's the beginning of the 15th of Adar. So that's on the rabbinic calendar for inside of Israel. Okay, moving on to news and the week in review. Week in review. The Israeli election this week put Netanyahu's bloc ahead of Gantz's bloc, but still 3 seats short of a Knesset majority. Several days after election, and it still remains to be seen if any party leader can cobble together a coalition or if Israel will go to a 4th election attempt this year. Interesting that voter turnout has steadily increased. In April 2019, the 21st election had 68.5% of eligible voters turn out. September 19th, that was the 22nd election, saw a 69.4% turnout out of the eligible voters. And this one, March 2, 2020, was the 23rd election, and we got 71% voter turnout. And of that, the Arab Druze voters also increased even more, starting with 49.2% in April 2019, 59.2% in September, and now 65% turned out for the election this March 2020. So, right now, the Arab Druze quarter of Israeli society is sending 15 Arab parliament members to the Knesset. So this increase still in the voters percentage still does not match the high points such as 85%, which was reached in 1949. And between 1949 and 1999, there was a high percentage of voter turnout. And then after that, there was a big low point. Only 62% of the eligible voters turned out in the 2006 election. So Israel is climbing back up and increasing voter participation right now. Meanwhile, in the news, the USA Democrats narrowed the field with Pocahontas Warren, Minnie Mike, and Mayor Pete dropping out. In Israel, just as Elizabeth Warren failed to win her home state, Massachusetts, Israel's Lieberman struggled to hang on to his kingmaker role between Netanyahu and Gantz. In the midst of a poor election showing for his party, he even failed in his own village of Nokdim. He came in third in Nokdim after Netanyahu's Likud party and after Naftali Bennett's Yamina party. So, meanwhile, moving on in the news, the Iran coronavirus infections exceeded 3,500 people, with 100 dead, but possibly they're not being truthful about that number. It might be much higher. Even Iran's parliament is infected. As of this week, Israel has diagnosed only 17 people, including 1 soldier. And between 50,000 and 100,000 people are in home quarantine, most of them voluntary home quarantine, including 500 to 600 soldiers and a handful of celebrities, some of whom have voluntarily entered home quarantine for at least 14 days after traveling. Israel is aggressively blocking many airlines, and even El Al plans to lay off 1,000 workers, which is 1/6 of its workforce, and to cut executive and director salaries by 20% retroactively back to March 1st. Otherwise, El Al airline complains that it's not sure that it can even remain in business with all of this downturn in traveling. Okay, now moving on with the news. Right now, it's what's on page 2 of the Israeli news, because what's on page 2 in the Israeli news is possibly on page 59 in Bulgaria. Now, on page 2, we have the Israel Defense Minister, Naftali Bennett, has closed Bethlehem after 7 cases of coronavirus were discovered there due to a visit from Greek tourists. The Palestinian Authority government has also decided to shut down all schools, universities, and colleges in the Bethlehem area, also Jericho and the Jordan Valley, for the next 2 weeks. Israel has sent 250 virus test kits to the Palestinian Authority government. So coordinating with the Palestinians to help limit the spread of the virus. The Israeli government made a decision back in 2002 to give this job to the defense minister anytime there's a pandemic with a high death rate. So, since March 5th, 2020, this coronavirus issue in Israel is officially handled by Naftali Bennett, the Minister of Defense. All right, now we're turning to reader questions. Why does Leviticus 19:19 write that combining wool and linen together is forbidden? So what we see here is that the ephod, or the girdle of the high priest, was made of linen and dyed thread. And this is according to Exodus 28, 6 through 8, and Exodus 39, 4 through 5. So one view is that the dyed thread, which is not specified what it is, the guesswork there is that the dyed thread would have been made of wool, according to Rabbinic Judaism, but Karaite Judaism maintains that the dyed thread must also be linen in order to fulfill the command. So Rabbinic Judaism explains that the linen belt would be embroidered with colored wool threads. Karaite Judaism claims that the colored thread embroidery would also be linen. Clothing was found from the Bar Kokhba era with tzitziot made with linen and wool threads, which means that those Jews followed the rabbinic tradition rather than the Karaite tradition. We see in the Talmud, Rabbi Judah Hanasi was of the opinion that the girdle of the ordinary priest was mixed, but Rabbi Eliezer says that it was of fine linen only, with no wool threads. The Talmud states that the high priest wore a linen girdle on Yom Kippur and a girdle of shatnetz mixed linen and wool on all the other days. And that's the Talmud Yoma 12b. And we see there is a dispute about this between Rabbi Judah Hanasi and Rabbi Eliezer, son of Rabbi Shimon, and whether there's a difference between the girdle used on Yom Kippur versus the girdle that is used during the rest of the year. So my summary here is that first, according to the Epistle to the Hebrews, that the 1/3 of the Torah, represented as the instruction of the Levites, has been changed, since the high priest, Kohen Hagadol, is not a priest of the order of the Levites now, but a priest of the order of Melchizedek, which priesthood existed prior to the Levitical priesthood and only stood aside during the temporary period of the Levitical priesthood. Therefore, if rules for Levites have any relevance today, it would only be some metaphorical application under today's priesthood of Melchizedek. And Yeshua the Messiah is the Kohen Hagadol of the priesthood of Melchizedek, which is the priesthood in effect today. So, secondly, the Levitical priest's girdle is explicitly written as made of linen, and yet the material for the colored embroidery thread is not written explicitly there in the Tanakh. This is why rabbis were able to argue whether that embroidery thread was wool or linen. There's no hint that cotton was ever cultivated in Israel at that time, and woven goat hair is out of the question. But still, there's no reason that linen thread is impossible to dye with colors. So why couldn't linen be used as the embroidery thread on the ephod or on the girdle? Why not? Thirdly, the main point is keep the statutes of Yahovah, Yud He Vav He, and avoid the mixing of animal breeds, mixing seeds for sowing. These rules are for all time, so why not also the prohibition against mixing linen and wool clothing? Even though the rabbis disagree, they all agree that the girdle in question is only for the Levitical priests, not for the common people. So the prohibition against mixing still applies for the common people. So today, most people agree that there are no Levitical priests. The Second Temple did fall after all. And we who believe the book of Hebrews understand that priesthood was replaced completely by the priesthood of Melchizedek, and Yeshua the Messiah is the Kohen Hagadol, high priest, in that priestly order. So then it's written, "You shall keep my statutes. You shall not let your livestock breed with another kind. You shall not sow your field with mixed seed, nor shall a garment of mixed linen and wool come upon you." Leviticus 19:19. Further, you shall not wear a garment of different sorts, such as wool and linen mixed together. Deuteronomy 22:11. Okay, so that's it for this week's Torah portion for the week of March 5th and 6th, 2020. And we're looking forward towards Purim happening next week. Thank you very much for watching. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope we'll answer your questions. Please send further questions to me, and I look forward to doing my very best to answer them. And keep tuned, and remember to hit the bell icon and all that stuff so that you can get further news updates and scripture updates here from the Bible Bomb Shelter in Samaria, Israel. Bye. Thanks for now. See you soon, and Shabbat Shalom.